Welcome to my scientifically informed insider look at mental health topics. If you find this video to be interesting or helpful, please like it and subscribe to my channel. Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today's question is, does television viewing cause narcissism? Now, to help answer this question about narcissism and exposure to television programming, I'm using an article that was published in 2018 by Lull and Dickinson, and I'll put the reference for this article in the description for this video. Sometimes when we hear about the trait narcissism in the world of mental health treatment, we think of the personality disorder, narcissistic personality disorder. Now, the trait narcissism that we're talking about here is really subclinical narcissism, so it doesn't rise to the level of narcissistic personality disorder, but I'll still review the symptom criteria of the disorder. We see the symptoms of NPD are grandiosity, having fantasies of success and power, feeling special or unique, requiring excessive admiration, having a sense of entitlement, tending to exploit others, having a lack of empathy, tending to envy others and believing that others envy you, and being arrogant or pretentious. So again, these are the symptom criteria for narcissistic personality disorder. If we saw lower levels of these symptoms or only a few of these symptoms, that might be classified as subclinical narcissism. Now, narcissistic personality disorder, of course, is an official diagnosis in the DSM, and subclinical narcissism is not. Both have been associated, however, with negative outcomes. In the case of subclinical narcissism, we see it has an association with psychopathy, an association with aggression, and sexual infidelity. Now, in terms of television, that particular type of media, influencing personality, we see a few different theories here. One theory here is that culture influences personality, and that's fairly well established. We also see that television is one way in which culture is spread. Therefore, it makes sense that television would influence personality. And again, this is somewhat well supported, although you could certainly make the argument that personality also influences culture, and personality also influences television. So there's a complex association between television, culture, and personality traits. One could make the argument that television may just reflect what's already there in terms of personality traits. But in general, I think most would agree, and certainly the evidence from research is clear, television can have an influence on personality. So the question is, what type of influence is it having? Now, we see here that there's evidence to support that television can have a behavioral modeling effect. So individuals who are exposed to a lot of television may mimic the behaviors of individuals they see on television. But there's also another type of modeling called abstract modeling. And this is where an individual learns not only what to do, that would be the behavioral piece, but rather who to be. So they're really learning both. So their personality is being formed through this type of abstract modeling. So before the study I'm referencing here, what did we know about narcissism in television? Really, there wasn't a lot out there. We saw there were studies about materialistic values in television, and we know that narcissism has an association with materialistic values. The evidence supports that TV cultivates materialistic values. And considering this association with narcissism, we know that both have a drive for fame and wealth, and both are associated with compulsively buying exclusive and expensive products. So considering the relationship between materialistic values and narcissism, and what we know already, it makes sense that there would be some connection between television and narcissism. So what's the general trend with narcissism? Well, we know over the last 30 years that in general, narcissistic traits have increased, the levels have increased, and empathy has decreased, which of course would make a lot of sense, as lack of empathy is one of the traits we see associated with narcissism. And we know that this may be related to several TV genres rather than watching television overall. So we know that some genres seem to have a stronger association with narcissism than others. For example, we know that with reality TV stars, they tend to have higher levels of narcissism than celebrities in general. And we also know that individuals who watch reality TV shows tend to have higher levels of narcissism. In the sports genre of television, we see that athletes have around the same levels of narcissism as reality TV stars. So similar dynamics there between reality TV and sports. Now, there's also some evidence that the suspense, thriller, horror genre could be associated with narcissism because we have research that shows it's associated with antisocial behavior. And you might remember before that I mentioned that subclinical narcissism has that relationship with psychopathy. And of course, antisocial behavior would be one of the traits we see with psychopathy. There may also be a few other genres involved. We see research that indicates that materialistic values are associated with watching the news, soap operas, action adventures, game shows, talk shows, and sports shows. So really, between what we know with narcissism and materialistic values, the sports shows are the only ones that overlap, that one genre. This study looked at all the genres I mentioned, plus other genres like comedy, crime drama, documentaries, and political talk shows. So in this study, they really covered a number of genres, and they wanted to see which ones, if any, had a relationship with narcissism. So what were the results from this study? What did they find? Well, the sample here was 565 college students. So that's important to keep in mind. It's not, of course, necessarily representative of the whole population. But in general, they found that trait narcissism has been increasing. So their research was consistent with prior research that indicates that over the last 30 years, narcissism has been on the rise. And specifically, they found that increased TV exposure was associated with higher levels of narcissism. And the effect, that effect of TV exposure, could be accounted for by just 4 genres: reality TV, sports, suspense, thriller, horror, and political talk shows. Interestingly, there was a negative association between narcissism and the news. So individuals who tended to watch the news had lower levels of narcissism. There was no association with narcissism with all the other genres in this study. So there were some interesting findings from the study. The relationship between narcissism and the political talk shows was a bit of a surprise considering what we knew from prior literature. A few things to keep in mind with the results of the study. The first is this was about correlation and not causation. We see that being exposed to these particular television genres was related to higher levels of narcissism. That doesn't mean they caused the higher levels. It could be that narcissism led to these individuals watching these particular genres of television. Or there could be some other explanation we don't know about. Another thing to keep in mind is these are the results for a particular sample. So just because a particular individual watches these television genres doesn't mean that they're going to have higher levels of narcissism. This study really gives us a general trend. It can't be used to identify the narcissistic levels for one particular person. I hope you found this description of television exposure and narcissism to be interesting. Thanks for watching.